Rules for generating carbon credits are defined by groups called registries, like B-Carbon. Registries produce detailed step-by-step processes that landowners can follow to apply for carbon credits. These are called protocols or methodologies. If you decide to apply for carbon credits, you will submit an application to the registry of your choice. The registry will then review your submission, and upon approval, they'll certify and issue a certain number of carbon credits for your project. You'll receive those carbon credits, which then can be sold.
But there's a lot of different types of protocols out there. How do you go about selecting the one that's right for you? The first way to narrow things down is by choosing the land cover type and management strategy that's most relevant to your property. Different natural ecosystems store carbon in different ways, so there's typically distinct types of protocols for each. There's soil protocols, forest protocols, and wetland protocols, just to name a few. Once you select the category that's most relevant to you, let's say forest, you might need to choose between different protocols that target different types of management. Extending your harvest rotation might fall under a different protocol than planting new trees, for example. And once you've narrowed things down to management and land use, you'll need to decide what registry to work with. Remember, the registry is the group that writes the rules that determine whether and how you can get carbon credits. And depending on your management choices, you might have one option here or many. In general, it's determined by how common your land management practice is. The more well established, the more likely it is that you'll have options between different registries and their protocols at this stage.
It's up to you to decide which registry you want to work with. But it's not a decision to be taken lightly. As we know, it takes time, years, for natural ecosystems to store carbon. So deciding to work with a protocol and registry is typically a multi-year commitment. This means once you start working with a registry under their protocol, it can be hard to walk back that decision if you decide to change your mind. That's why it's important to understand what you want and need out of a project going in. There are a few key aspects of a protocol to keep in mind when evaluating how it stacks up with your goals. Every protocol is unique and might require different actions or change practices from the landowner. They might have different durations of timing or calculate your final carbon credits in a different way by using modeling, measurements, or some combination of both.
Let's look at the requirements of the B-Carbon Forest Protocol as an example. This protocol lays out the rules required to measure and certify the carbon that's stored in a sustainably managed forest. The first step of the protocol is to create a sustainable forest management plan. To learn more about land management, you can check out the previous video in our series. Once you have your forest management plan figured out and implemented, you'll want to prepare your land to be sampled. Sampling is the process of assessing a plot of land for its carbon contents. It's typically performed by a crew of professionals who do things like collect soil cores, measure trees via timber cruises, and otherwise assess your land while trying to disturb it as little as possible. Don't worry, you won't be left alone to figure out these details by yourself. You'll typically be supported by a team of experts, like your forester and even the registry you're working with on the project. The B-Carbon protocol requires that your land be measured when you first start the protocol in year 0, and then again 5 years later. In the time in between, you'll continue to keep records of how you're managing your land, and make note of any changes. Then, 5 years after you started, the sampling crew will return for a second round of testing. Their year 5 measurements will show how much carbon has been stored since you started the project, and you'll receive credit for the difference between your year 5 and year 0 measurements.
Wow, that was a lot. We just went over the process for one protocol in a nutshell. And we learned that there are a lot of different protocols out there, put out by a lot of different registries, each with its own unique requirements and rules. Understanding those rules and their key differences will help you to advocate for yourself and make the best decision for your property and needs.